That leads on then quite naturally, I think, to, I think Lance is right to say that the individuals perhaps need to push back a little bit about these issues, but obviously government has a responsibility ethically, if nothing else, to curtail any, well, unethical behaviour with the use of this data. So that leads us on to the Data Protection Act, which was fit for purpose perhaps a few years ago, but doesn't really take into account a lot of these newer issues. So is it fit for purpose? Let's start there.
I don't think it's the legislation that's the problem, although sections 29 and 35 of the DPA are being used mercilessly to gather data without consent in the name of anti-fraud, in the hope that it can be repurposed later. So companies are gathering far more data than is required, claiming, oh, it relates to a transaction 5 years ago. You know, the location of the customer at the time. It's actually meaningless in the context of fraud. But that data's coming in, and the challenge we have is not the Act, it's the Information Commissioner's Office, who are neither empowered nor funded to do anything about this.
To enforce it, yeah.
So we go to somewhere like Germany, yes, they have good legislation, they've arguably much better legislation, but they've also got better funded and greater empowered commissioners who can come after companies. Whereas the UK Commissioner is, I think, generally pretty thinly stretched on a good day.
Right.
So unless they can see something going badly wrong, they simply don't have the resource to intervene. And it means that the risk-reward balance for a company swings in the company's favour.
Yes.
Because they know they're going to get away with it.
That
So
can't be
they're
good for the
not
individual though,
something
can it?
No,
It's not good for the individual. I think there's a big gap between what companies can do and the legislation. So Germany's very good. In fact, we've got offices in Germany and we have to hire a consultant to come in and make sure we're following data protection. So, I think they've got it right. But the other extreme is in the US, where it's a marketeer's dream, so they will drive it. And organisations, I think, will always go on we'll do what we can to get away with it because there is a potential commercial gain there.
Perversely, of course, US consumers then tend to enjoy greater empowerment because they can sue far more easily than
they can litigate. Yeah.
ones can. So it's a different viewpoint, different approach towards regulation.
So are you saying there, Toby, that the framework of the Data Protection Act is right? It sounds almost as specific as our definition of what anti-fraud data is might need to be tightened up a little bit.
It's not that of course the framework isn't correct, and that's why the European Commission is hoping to introduce a regulation in the near future. But the issue here is that if we rely on legislation to protect us, it will never keep up with technology.
There's a big gap.
So we have to have far better enforcement mechanisms so that when we can see something going wrong, we can act on it. And without that enforcement, you could have the best data protection you could imagine. It would still be meaningless.
Right. Okay, that's an interesting point.